Thank you for listening to Overleveraged, where we explore the big macro themes affecting investors, economic imbalances, giant geopolitical trends, tail risks and tremors, and everywhere risks are not being fully priced into markets. Remember, trading carries risk, and all opinions are provided as general market commentary only. Please do your own research. Our risk warning will follow at the end. Hello and welcome to Overleveraged, and we're back talking about politics and its impact on the markets, and particularly what's happening in Europe with regards to the right wing, so the rise of the right. Joining me today is Helen Thomas from Blood Money.
Hello.
Welcome as always, back for another round. So today we're back on the political side of things. Again, in your sort of kind of purview, or is that the right word?
It's a good word, yeah. You're
purview.
Thinking of that.
Milieu.
Yeah.
I've been reading history books a bit recently. Milieu is a word that keeps
comes up a lot, yeah.
up. So.
Very much my milieu.
Yeah. So the rise of the right, we talked about this in our Finalto Watchlist 2024, the impact that this might have. So we're going to try and dive into it in a bit more detail now. As a background, obviously the key is this set of elections this year. There's a lot of elections taking place around the world. We've talked about that here before. In Europe, it is the European parliamentary elections.
That is right.
Which are taking place in the summer, in June.
That's right.
I think.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
We've got how many seats? 700?
Oh my goodness, now you're asking. A lot
700,
of seats, yes.
720 seats. 400 million people will be voting across the European Union. And the polling suggests that the right wing is doing well. So as a background to this, we've had lots of right-wing parties do quite well over the last couple of years. Marine Le Pen, obviously, in France, gave Macron a pretty good run for his money a few years ago. Mm-hmm. I think she pulled 42% in the final. Mm-hmm.
Well, the most relevant part of that, the French presidential election, the most interesting statistic is what I think they call the blank ballot, or the white ballot, blanche ballot. Mm-hmm. As in people who vote for neither candidate. That was the highest in 55 years.
I don't blame them, to be honest.
Exactly. So actually, even though Macron won, in a straight 50-50, if you take into account effectively that none of the aboves, he got about 1/3 of the vote. So
people have been turned off for sure. But she's sort of been the kind of talisman, the Marianne, if you like, of the French right, and indeed of the European right, so sort of pushing that agenda.
Yep.
We had last year Geert Wilders in Holland, who did very well, resounding victory, but again showing the difficulties that the right wing faces in terms of forming a government.
Yes, we still haven't got one at the time of recording anyway.
Yeah.
I think we got confident about that. It takes them days. It takes them months and months, doesn't it, to form
and
a Dutch government?
Belgium went about a year or 2 years or something without a government, and showed that you don't really need one.
Yes.
So that's maybe something that we...
Topic for another time.
Yeah. AFD in Germany, they're maybe one of the more controversial ones, polling around 20%, up to towards 25%.
Second in the polls. Quite astonishing.
And there's been a sort of efforts by the government to try and counter them, which might be counterproductive. Meloni in Italy, I think she's in not the hard right. I think I'm trying to. There's different groupings. So
yes,
I think we need to be
careful.
clear here, because there's the far right Identity and Democracy grouping in the European Parliament, which is currently the 6th largest of the 7 groupings. Mm-hmm. Currently has about 58 MEPs. And then there's the right-wing European Conservatives and Reformist group, and that's the home of, for example, Poland's Law and Justice Party and the Brothers of Italy Party, which is the ruling party in Italy.
Yes.
And that is, I think, that's the 5th largest grouping. So there is I think just bear in mind that we're sort of grouping certain right-wing parties all on the hard right or extreme or whatever, but there are slightly different groupings that exist. But I think the point we're trying to make here is that against this backdrop, we're rather coming into these elections this year with all the focus on elections and democracy in general. Europe's had a massive shift to the right, and the key point that we're trying to make here in over leverage, and what we're discussing is always what's not priced, or at least
Yes.
trying to explore what's not priced. And we've often had right-wing parties, Georg Haider in Austria, for example, that was 25 years ago. We've had Meloni in Italy, and we see maybe some movement in the market, some uncertainty.
Yes.
Government bond yields move up, and that reflects some uncertainty, for example. But by and large, it comes back. It reverts to the mean. The sort of centrists within Europe kind of get their stuff together, and it all kind of wobbles along and kind of they muddle through. But the key difference this year is, I think, is the market too complacent about just how far the right is going to do, just how well the right wing is going to do, and also secondly, is the market too complacent about the fact that it's not just a peripheral issue anymore, it's Germany and France.
It is,
and are the markets too complacent about what a big shift to the right means within that core Franco-German alliance that's the bedrock of the European Union, of the European project? They are the driving force for Europe.
Well, absolutely. You're right to point this out on France and Germany, because, as you say, we've been talking about the rise of the right for decades, really.
Yeah.
And there's been these sort of fits and starts where they've really done well and then it's come back a bit. But if it's embedding itself in France and Germany, then that's a whole different ballgame. And on that front, Germany is quite astonishing what's happened there, for those of you who maybe haven't been looking too much at this. So it's got a 3-party coalition at the moment, precisely because the historic parties of government haven't been doing very well, as has been going across the board again for decades, where electorates are getting frustrated, realigning themselves and finding the old parties just don't do what they need them to do. And quite often the old parties have been getting caught up in corruption scandals, as people tend to do when they're in power for a long time.
Yeah.
So the left, sort of left of centre party, the SPD in Germany, didn't have enough votes to form even a 2-party coalition, which had been the norm in Germany. So it's now a 3-party coalition, and it's a really unhappy coalition, because you've got the Greens who are in there, they are one of the most pragmatic green parties in the world, but they're up against, in being in a coalition with the FDP, who are very pro-business, balanced budget party, and some Schwarze Null. And that is a tension which is continuing to manifest itself, and it's really a struggle for that government to run. So the people who are very unhappy with that government have grown and are looking for something different, and have turned to the AFD, which had been declared almost dead, not that long ago. And suddenly now, as you say, 25% in the polls. I mean,
I think
that's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
Significant. That's a quarter.
They're not going anywhere. I think I think one of the things that we do see these fits and starts, as you said, of the right, but this seems like a more structural shift that's taking place, and it's very hard not to look at what's happened in the last decade with immigration.
Merkel's offer, open doors to immigrants.
There has been a shift.
Created concerns. I mean, I think this point about immigration it's a very, very important one that will not go away in any developed nation, or in fact, indeed, in any country. And I tell you why, and that is because the economic structural shift that happened post the pandemic, whereby some jobs we just don't need them anymore, other ones we need loads of them, and there's a question over whether immigrants can or should fill those jobs if your domestic workers don't have the skills. And at the same time, because of inflation hurting everybody in the pocket, there's less to go around. Yeah. So even in the pie is growing, real wages are not really keeping pace. And then, of course, then inevitably, you get people arguing over, well, there's not enough resources and I don't want them to have it. I want to have it, but I don't want to change my skills to do it. The government must do something, and it just gets in this mess.
Yeah.
And it's not going to go away. That trend is not going to go away. I mean, one of the really interesting things about the US economically, over why they've not really had a soft or even hard landing, is actually they've had quite a lot of net inward migration. visa issuances are significantly higher now than they were before the pandemic.
Yeah, so I had a look at this a few weeks ago, and all jobs, net on a net basis, obviously, I'm not talking about all in an absolute sense, but on a net basis, all the jobs that have been created since 2019
in
America have gone to foreign-born workers. So
the
native population number of jobs are the same as they were in 2019.
So, and you can imagine, you can see that creates flashpoints and tensions on one hand. Perhaps on the other hand, if you can get growth, maybe it doesn't. Maybe if you get the growth to deliver the services to the new people who are coming in and etc., then it's sort of a virtuous circle of immigration. But it really depends on your view of the people coming in and what kind of economy you want.
Yeah, and
I'm trying not to put any political bias into talking about immigration, but it's such a loaded word.
It is loaded, and it is, but we have to tackle it. But we're not. This is not a direct politics podcast.
No.
It's we are macro and macroeconomic.
What does it mean for the economy and for the market?
But it is important to touch on these things to explain why it matters to the economy.
Exactly, and so for the US, you could argue that the Joe Biden stance, the Democrat stance on immigration, has allowed them to avoid a recession thus far, but may well be storing up problems down the line in other ways that
and maybe ensuring that they lose the next election because people are worried about the immigration.
And then when you come to the Europe, where Germany is struggling desperately economically.
Yeah.
Then you can also understand that any frictions over immigration flare up further. But then you could argue it's almost a macroeconomic vicious cycle where if you don't have the skills and you can't get the growth, then you're never going to, that frustration that some have with immigrants is going to get bigger, and you can't solve your problem. So that I think what I'm really driving at here in terms of what this means and the rise of the right is for Germany and France, it's almost a symptom, it's an indicator of economic decline and stagnation, and also an inability of the government to actually solve that. So that should, all else equal, you should really put a stagflation premium into French and German bonds.
Yeah.
And that's what's relevant.
And that's where the rise of the right is a symptom. So we're diagnosing that as a symptom there of other problems, which is inflation and disenfranchisement or whatever. But what does it mean going forward? I guess is
it's going to get worse.
It's going to get worse. and the thing is that all these, as we discussed at the start, they are different organisations, and it's critical to understand that the whole point of them is that they're nationalist, and therefore they have different ideas and different views on separate issues, but there seems to be a commonality, which is hostility to the European Union. We've even heard about Dexit in Germany, and Olaf Scholz threw his toys out the pram. But the mention of it.
That was from the head of the AfD. She gave an interview, didn't she? To say that.
So the AfD was saying we would look at what Britain did and we would give people the chance. And Olaf Scholz, is the Chancellor of Germany, was very angry about even the suggestion, I think. And he said that he pointed out that Germany has done the best out of the European project, which, as we all know, by suppressing its currency for the last 25 years. Has certainly helped it as an exporting country.
Oh yes, of course.
But the point I guess you're trying to make is that there's a consistent anti-European flavour to the right, and what happens if the European Parliament itself starts to get dominated by people who don't like
who don't
Europe,
even want
to be there,
to be in the European Parliament.
If they're all Nigel Farages within the European Parliament, that changes the very thrust of the institutions. It changes how. For example, how fiscal policy rules maybe get
which has been
worked out.
Which is actually something that has had hardly any coverage over these last few years. But it's so important, and it used to be an obsession of those investing and trading in any European asset, was to do with the fiscal rules underneath the Euro, the EMU, European Monetary Union. And as we all know, to be fair, this is okay. You suspend your rules when there's an emergency. as there has been. But now
perpetual emergencies is the
they're
way
trying to redraw
yeah.
these rules, aren't they? And of course in Germany, their own rules, their own constitutional court has ruled against their government for trying to redeploy emergency pandemic funds into green investment, which threw the whole budget making process into absolute chaos. So some of this stuff, it sounds geeky and techie and irrelevant. It's actually extremely relevant to these nations. What I would say about EMU and Europe and the fabric of Europe itself, and that will probably come out of these elections, is the right wing, I'm sure, will do better and will do well and have a higher result. The centrist parties might do as well, because a lot of features of elections, as we've talked about often on this podcast, Neil, is none of the above. I don't like the other guy. I'm voting for this guy because I don't like the other guy.
Yeah.
So with the rise of the right, you actually do get people just turning back to legacy centrist parties because they know, they really want to, really negate that. They want to neutralise that power. But here's the thing. So let's say in these European, we get sort of what looks like a sort of schizophrenic result where the centre does well and the right wing does well. That makes policy making really difficult. And as you said, you create an antagonistic relationship within the institution of the people who have come from the elite who want to save it, and those who want to destroy it. And that, until one of those has a huge majority, you're in for constant arguing.
Yeah.
So again, it's going to make even setting fiscal rules, every time you go to set a rule, it will be a huge political flashpoint, and it will be very hard to get it agreed.
Yeah, and I guess that's the whole discourse, the language, the issues that have been talked about have been dragged to the right.
Yes, because they set the terms of the debate.
They're setting, so even if policy is not going in that direction, the things that people are talking about are the things that the right wants to talk about.
It's their agenda, exactly. It's their agenda.
And that will have implications. And I think, there's always sort of chatter about bond yields. I think, we saw, for example, in Italy over the last sort of late summer, October, bond yields were going higher. And I've got reports here from the FT and Bloomberg, Maloney's policies unnerving bond investors, talking about this random windfall tax on banks and slightly, schizophrenic maybe policy making on the hoof. But that's come down, the premiums come down, and Italian bond yields have really fallen since then. So that was obviously a bit of a storm.
But don't you think a lot of what's going on right now can be, it's amazing when this happens in markets, but it does. It can be traced back to October 31st last year, come the 1st of November, which was the US refunding announcement.
Yeah.
And the very fact that apparently it was lower number than it was expected set off this huge bond rally, huge equity rally. Now we're getting into FOMO. I've got to get in on it. All rationality goes out the window. And that's probably towards then the last phases of this. It will not last, that. And the big story really for the market for this year is, are interest rates actually going to potentially even go up again? Or certainly be higher for longer. And is political risk back? Yes, it is. And that QE, which had again put a dampener on all these bonds, we're actually going the other way. We're going to QT, we're going to withdrawal of liquidity, we've done all the rate hikes. In a way, that tide that Warren Buffett talks about is going to go out, and we're going to see the people who are right wing to sort of slightly corrupt his comment.
I want to see Geert Wilders swimming naked.
Yeah, let's maybe leave that. But anyway, you're absolutely spot on to pick this up as a risk that is manifestly coming. That has yet to be appreciated.
And I think it's as an example, I think bringing it back to the UK, the Truss Kwarteng attempt. They're not necessarily hard right, but they're certainly on a right-wing policy agenda economically. Even if socially, Liz Truss is very liberal, or so I'm told. Economically very right-wing policies attempt to trickle down an instant bond market reaction. Things were bubbling up anyway as well, so it wasn't just their fault. But there was a reaction there, and you could see, if you look at the cumulative effect of lots of right-wing agendas, gender
At once,
setting
yeah.
all at once.
In Europe.
In Europe, it definitely has the potential to see some volatility.
Yeah. I'm just going to mention the Amundi CIO, because they're a French asset manager, aren't they? He was quoted in the FT talking about how that Kwarteng gilt explosion could happen to treasuries as a result of Trump getting in, which I think actually is not quite right. But if you want to look at where the argument could manifest, actually in Europe is probably more of a likely candidate. And one element that he did say in this FT article was he said Korean and Japanese investors are now piling into US corporate debt rather than the sovereign, because the sovereign is no longer the safe asset. And I think that's actually been a theme that's been knocking around since the sovereign debt crisis. Obviously, it's how creditworthy are sovereigns, but it went away in the mass QE age. Yeah. But as that liquidity tide goes out and the QE is ended, I think it absolutely could hove back into view. And in fact, these core European nations, in the aftermath of these elections, could well be where the spotlight falls.
That'd be interesting. Well, it's bound to be interesting anyway, because we've got lots of elections this year.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking about them in more detail as we go along. And as new things happen, well, that's the beauty of it, because things will change. And I think by the time we get to the middle of the year, there'll be some very interesting developments. And potentially some regime changes. So just a final note on Marine Le Pen, because we started talking about Marine Le Pen, and the latest poll from France showing that she would actually beat Macron in a second round runoff. There you go. Which just goes to show how much things have changed over the last 20 years in France and across the EU. So lots happening, and lots of volatility, no doubt, ahead. So thanks very much, Helen, for joining us.
Thank you.
Remember, all opinions, news, research, analysis, prices, or other information is provided as general market commentary and not as investment advice, and all potential results discussed are not guaranteed to be achieved. The information may have been derived from publicly available sources, company reports, personal research, or surveys. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. Trading carries risk of capital loss, and the service is available to professional clients only.